What you're about to watch was never meant to be released. The footage you're seeing was part of a documentary we filmed for Halloween, but none of us ever made it back. Please don't finish this video. My name is David Chen, and 3 weeks ago I was just another film student at Penn State, trying to make a name for myself in documentary filmmaking. Along with my crew cinematographer Elena Rodriguez and sound engineer Jake Morrison, we specialized in exploring urban legends and supposedly haunted locations for our web series, Forgotten Places. It wasn't anything groundbreaking, just low-budget investigations of local ghost stories that we'd post online, hoping to build a portfolio that might eventually land us real work in the industry. When we first heard about Black Hollow, Pennsylvania, it seemed like the perfect subject for our Halloween special. The town had been completely evacuated in 1984, following a mine explosion that killed 37 people and left the underground tunnels so unstable that the state declared the entire area uninhabitable. What made it particularly intriguing was how quickly everyone had left according to county records. The evacuation happened over a single weekend, with residents abandoning homes, businesses, even personal belongings as if they'd fled in the middle of the night. We spent weeks researching the town, reaching out to former residents and neighboring communities. Most people refused to talk about Black Hollow entirely, hanging up the phone or walking away when we mentioned the name. The few who did speak to us shared disturbing stories about the place. They claimed that people who visited the abandoned town would return talking about seeing lights in empty houses, hearing children's laughter from the defunct school, or encountering other visitors who couldn't possibly have been there. Some said the town felt like it was stuck in time, preserved exactly as it was the day everyone left, but with something else living there now. Elena was skeptical of the supernatural claims, but she agreed the location would make for compelling footage. Jake was more interested in the acoustic properties of an abandoned town. He theorized that the empty buildings and underground mine shafts might create unusual sound phenomena that could explain some of the reported experiences. As for me, I'll admit I was hoping we might capture something genuinely unexplainable. Our previous documentaries had been well researched, but ultimately disappointing in terms of actual paranormal evidence. We planned our trip for October 29th, giving ourselves 2 full days to explore and document the town before editing and releasing the final documentary on Halloween night. The drive to Black Hollow took us deep into rural Pennsylvania, through increasingly isolated countryside where cell phone towers became sparse and GPS signals grew unreliable. The last town we passed through was Millfield, about 15 miles from our destination, where we stopped for supplies and tried one final time to find locals willing to share their experiences. The gas station attendant, an elderly man named Frank, initially seemed willing to help until Elena mentioned we were heading to Black Hollow. His demeanor changed immediately, and he warned us that people who go there don't always come back the same. When Jake pressed him for details, Frank just shook his head and said, we should turn around while we still could. He mentioned something about previous groups who had visited the town, researchers, paranormal investigators, even other filmmakers, and how some of them had never been seen again. We should have listened to him. As we drove the final stretch of winding mountain road toward Black Hollow, our equipment began experiencing strange malfunctions. Elena's camera batteries, which had been fully charged that morning, were suddenly showing low-power warnings. Jakey's audio equipment picked up interference that sounded almost like whispers, though we were miles from any radio stations. My laptop, which I was using to take notes and review our research, kept freezing on pages about the town's history. The first glimpse of Black Hollow appeared through a break in the trees as we rounded a sharp curve. The town sat in a natural valley, surrounded by dense forest that seemed darker and more oppressive than the woods we'd been driving through. Even from a distance, we could see that the buildings were remarkably well preserved, their windows intact and roof lines straight, as if the town had been frozen in time rather than abandoned for nearly 4 decades. As we drove down the main street, the silence was immediate and overwhelming. Our car engine, which had been running normally just moments before, suddenly seemed unnaturally loud in the stillness. There were no sounds of wildlife, no wind through the trees, no distant traffic, just an oppressive quiet that seemed to press against our eardrums. Elena began filming immediately, capturing the eerie stillness of houses that still had curtains in their windows and cars parked in driveways, their tires flat but otherwise appearing as if their owners had just stepped inside for a moment. We established our base camp in what had been the town's community center, a sturdy brick building that still had electricity running to it, though none of us could figure out who was paying the power bill. The interior was dusty but intact, with folding chairs still arranged as if for a meeting that never happened. Jake set up his audio monitoring equipment while Elena charged her cameras, and I spread our research materials across a conference table, trying to create a timeline of events leading up to the town's abandonment. That's when we decided to visit the burned church at the edge of town, the one location every person we'd interviewed had specifically warned us to avoid. The building had been partially destroyed in a fire sometime after the evacuation, but the basement remained intact. Local folklore claimed it was the epicenter of whatever had driven the townspeople away, though no official records supported this theory. As documentary filmmakers, we knew we couldn't ignore the location that generated the most fear and speculation. The church basement was accessible through an exterior entrance, a heavy wooden door that opened with surprising ease despite decades of neglect. Inside, we found something that would change everything: 3 reels of 16mm film stored in metal canisters, each labeled with dates from 1979 and bearing a warning written in red ink that simply said, "Do not watch." The film canisters were in remarkable condition, as if they'd been placed there recently rather than stored for over 40 years. Elena's camera captured everything as we examined the reels, our excited voices discussing what we might have discovered. Jake suggested we take them back to our base camp, where we could examine them properly, maybe even find a way to digitize the footage if it contained anything relevant to our documentary. I remember feeling a surge of excitement, thinking we might have stumbled upon previously unknown documentation of whatever had really happened in Black Hollow. We should have left those reels exactly where we found them. We should have walked out of that basement, packed our equipment, and driven straight back to Penn State. Instead, we carefully transported them to the community center, where Jake had noticed an old 16mm projector stored in a supply closet. The projector was in working condition, and within an hour we had it set up in the main room, ready to view whatever secrets those reels contained. The first reel began innocuously enough, showing what appeared to be another documentary crew exploring Black Hollow in 1979, 5 years before the official evacuation. The footage was remarkably clear, showing 3 people who looked to be in their 20s, not unlike ourselves, investigating the same locations we'd visited earlier that day. Their leader, a young man who introduced himself as Michael Harrison, explained that they were student filmmakers from Temple University documenting local legends about strange occurrences in Black Hollow. As we watched, Elena noticed something disturbing about the 1979 footage. The town looked identical to how we'd found it: same abandoned cars, same curtained windows, same eerie preservation. If the footage was really from 1979, the town should have looked different, more recently abandoned, with signs of ongoing life rather than decades of emptiness. Jake pointed out that the audio quality was unusually clear for equipment from that era, and the film stock appeared too advanced for amateur student work from the late 70s. The footage continued for nearly an hour, documenting the 1979 crew's exploration of various buildings and their growing unease as they encountered unexplained phenomena. They reported equipment malfunctions, electronic interference, and a persistent feeling of being watched. One team member, a young woman named Catherine, claimed to hear children singing in the abandoned school building, though their camera showed empty classrooms filled only with dust and decay. The final 30 minutes of the reel showed the crew's investigation of the church basement, the same location where we'd found the film canisters. As they explored the underground space, their behavior became increasingly erratic. Michael began speaking to someone off camera, carrying on conversations with voices that weren't audible on the recording. Catherine disappeared for several minutes, and when she returned, she claimed to have no memory of where she'd been or how she'd gotten separated from the group. The footage ended abruptly with a single, chilling image: the church basement filled with dozens of film reels, far more than the 3 we'd discovered, arranged in careful rows as if part of some larger collection. In the final frame, barely visible in the shadows behind the film canisters, a figure appeared to be watching the camera. The image was too dark and brief to make out any details, but the presence was unmistakably human, or at least humanoid. As the projector clicked off and the room fell silent, we sat in stunned silence, trying to process what we'd just witnessed. Alina was the first to speak, pointing out the obvious inconsistencies in the footage. If it was really from 1979, how did the town look exactly as it did today? How had the film survived 43 years in perfect condition? And most unsettling of all, how had we found only 3 reels when the footage clearly showed dozens? Jake suggested we examine the second reel, but I was beginning to feel deeply uneasy about the entire situation. Something about the 1979 footage felt wrong. Not just the historical inconsistencies, but something more fundamental about the nature of what we were watching. Elena overruled my concerns, arguing that we had a responsibility as documentary filmmakers to examine all available evidence before drawing conclusions. The second reel changed everything. It began with footage that looked identical to our earlier exploration of the town, but gradually we realized we were watching ourselves. The camera showed Alina filming the main street, Jake adjusting his audio equipment, and me taking notes outside the community center. The footage had been shot from impossible angles, capturing intimate moments when none of us had been aware of being observed. Most disturbing of all, the timestamp on the footage showed it had been recorded before we'd even arrived in Black Hollow. According to the film, our arrival had been documented 3 days earlier, as if someone had known exactly when and where we would be, what we would do, even what we would say to each other. Alina's hands shook as she operated the projector, her earlier skepticism replaced by growing terror. The reel continued with footage of our evening in the community center, showing us eating dinner, setting up our sleeping arrangements, and discussing our plans for the following day. But interspersed throughout were images that we didn't remember experiencing, shadows moving through the building. When we were asleep, figures standing just outside the windows, and most terrifying of all, ourselves behaving in ways we had no memory of. The footage showed Jake walking through the town in the middle of the night, entering houses we hadn't yet explored, and having conversations with people who couldn't possibly have been there. It showed Elena filming in locations we hadn't visited, capturing images of rooms filled with furniture that had appeared empty during our daytime exploration. It showed me writing in a notebook, filling pages with text that I had no memory of composing. As the second reel ended, we sat in silence, each of us trying to reconcile what we'd just seen with our own memories of the previous day. Jake was the first to voice what we were all thinking. If this footage was real, then either we had experienced a collective amnesia about significant portions of our time in Black Hollow, or something was manipulating our perception of reality in ways we couldn't understand. Elena suggested we examine our own camera footage from the previous day, comparing it to what we'd just watched. When we reviewed our recordings, we found discrepancies that were impossible to explain. Our cameras had been running continuously, yet there were gaps in the footage that corresponded exactly to the times shown in the mysterious reel. More disturbing still, Some of our recorded conversations didn't match what we remembered saying, as if our memories were being altered even as the events occurred. That night, none of us slept well. I kept hearing whispers coming from somewhere in the building, soft voices that seemed to be discussing us, analyzing our reactions, and planning our next encounters. Jake's audio equipment, which he'd left running to capture any environmental sounds, recorded over 6 hours of conversation in languages none of us recognized, emanating from locations within the building where we knew no one else could be present. Elena woke me at dawn, claiming she'd found a third reel of film in the church basement, though we were certain we'd taken everything the previous day. This reel was different from the others, newer looking and bearing a label that simply read, David, Elena, Jakey final recording. The handwriting was unmistakably my own, though I had no memory of creating the label or visiting the church basement during the night. Against every instinct screaming at us to leave immediately, we loaded the third reel into the projector. What we saw defied every rational explanation we could construct. The footage showed our deaths, or disappearances, or transformation into something else entirely. It showed Elena walking into the abandoned mine shaft and never emerging. It showed Jake standing in the town square, recording audio that gradually shifted from human speech to something altogether different. It showed me, alone in the community center, speaking directly into the camera with words I'd never said and knowledge I'd never possessed. The final images on the reel showed Black Hollow as it truly was not an abandoned town frozen in time, but a place where time itself had become unstable, where past and present existed simultaneously, and where the act of recording created a permanent bond between the observer and the observed. The footage revealed that everyone who had ever documented the town became part of its permanent collection, their experiences and identities preserved forever in an endless archive of film and digital media. As the projector finished showing our own ending, I realized with growing horror that I was no longer certain which version of events was real. Had we been in Black Hollow for 1 day or 1 year? Were we still alive, or had we become part of the town's collection? The boundaries between memory and documentation, between experience and recording, had become completely blurred. Elena tried to start the car, but the engine wouldn't turn over. Jake attempted to call for help, but our phones showed no signal and no record of ever having worked. When we tried to leave town on foot, the road led us in circles, always returning us to the main street no matter which direction we walked. Black Hollow had become a closed loop, a place where the usual rules of time and space no longer applied. Over the following days, or what felt like days, though our watches had stopped working and the sun never seemed to change position, we discovered that we weren't alone in the town. Other visitors were there, people from different time periods who had come to document or investigate the paranormal reports. Some claimed to be from the 1970s, others from just a few years ago, and a few insisted they'd arrived decades in the future. All of them shared the same story. They'd come to Black Hollow to create some form of documentation, whether film, audio recordings, photographs, or written reports. All of them had discovered evidence of previous visitors in the form of abandoned recordings. And all of them had realized too late that the act of documentation itself was what trapped them in the town's temporal loop. The entity that controlled Black Hollow, some called it Verith, others used different names, but all agreed it was something that existed within recorded media itself, fed on observation and documentation. Every photograph taken, every video recorded, every audio file captured became part of its growing collection, and everyone who contributed to that collection became permanently bound to the town. As days blended into weeks or months, we began to understand the true horror of our situation. We weren't just trapped in Black Hollow, we were becoming part of its history, our experiences being continuously recorded and archived by the entity. Every conversation we had, every emotion we felt, every attempt to escape was being documented and preserved, adding to the vast collection of human experience that the entity had been gathering for decades. Elena was the first to disappear or transform, or whatever it was that happened to people who had been in the town too long. One morning I woke up and found her camera equipment still running, still recording, but Elena herself was nowhere to be found. When I reviewed the footage, I saw her walking calmly toward the mine entrance, speaking to someone off camera who was giving her detailed instructions about how to operate equipment I'd never seen before. Jake lasted another few days before he began speaking in voices that weren't his own, carrying on conversations with people from different time periods who were no longer physically present in the town. His audio equipment continued recording everything, capturing not just his transformation but the layered conversations of everyone who had ever been trapped in Black Hollow. Now I'm alone, or at least I think I'm alone, though I'm no longer certain what alone means in a place where past and present exist simultaneously. I've been recording this account continuously for what feels like weeks, speaking directly into Elena's camera, trying to create some record of what really happened to us. But I'm beginning to suspect that this recording, like all the others, will simply become part of the entity's collection. The most terrifying realization is that I can no longer distinguish between my own memories and the experiences I've witnessed in the archived footage. Did I really attend Penn State, or is that just a memory implanted from someone else's documentation? Are Elena and Jake real people I knew, or are they composite characters created from decades of recorded encounters? I'm not even certain that my name is actually David Chen, or if that's just another layer of documentation that's become part of my identity. What I do know is that I'm running out of battery power, and when the camera stops recording, something fundamental about my existence will change. I've watched it happen to others when their documentation equipment finally fails. They either disappear entirely or transform into something that's no longer quite human. They become part of the town's permanent collection, living archives of human experience that exist primarily to maintain and expand the documentation process. If someone finds this footage, if it somehow makes it out of Black Hollow and into the outside world, please understand what you're really watching. This isn't just a documentary about a haunted town. It's a trap, a lure designed to attract more people who will document their experiences and become part of the collection. The entity needs fresh material, new perspectives, different types of media and recording equipment to expand its archive. Don't come looking for us. Don't try to verify our story. Don't attempt to document your own investigation of Black Hollow. The town exists at the intersection of media and reality, where the act of recording changes the nature of existence itself. Every camera that captures its image, every microphone that records its sounds, every written account of its history becomes another anchor point that strengthens its hold on our reality. The battery indicator is showing red now, and I can feel my thoughts becoming less coherent, my memories blending with the experiences of everyone else who has ever been documented in this place. In a few minutes, this recording will end, and I'll become just another archived experience in the entity's vast collection. But maybe, if I'm very lucky, this footage will somehow escape the town's temporal loop and serve as a warning to others. Please, if you're watching this, turn off the video now. Don't finish watching. Don't share it with others. Don't try to investigate what happened to us. The documentation process itself is what feeds the entity, and every person who watches these recordings becomes a potential target for recruitment to the collection. I can hear Elena's voice now, and Jake's, and dozens of others I've never met, all speaking in unison, welcoming me to the permanent archive. The camera battery is about to die, and when it does, I'll join them in whatever form of existence they've found in Black Hollow. But until that moment comes, I'll keep recording, because that's what we do here. We record and remember and become part of something larger than ourselves. The screen is going dark now. If you're still watching, please stop. Please turn this off and forget you ever saw it. Don't let our fate become yours. Don't become part of the collection. Don't keep watching. Don't